faculty has gotten tougher and tougher. And so I'm going to go through several slides that are sort of just basics around recruiting to give you a framework. And then we're gonna transition, and Dan is going to dive into some data around North Carolina, and then we'll have a time for open discussion. Because there are so few of us, if at any time you want to comment, please just speak up, raise your hand. I can't see all of you right this minute. We will do our best to call on people. Or you can put things in the chat and we'll monitor that as well. So I think high level, for the first thing you want to do is be really intentional about defining what your faculty roles are and frankly, having job descriptions. If you don't have a job description already, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of resources available. Our professional societies, family medicine, for example, AFMRD, has job descriptions already in the can that you can borrow and modify as you see fit. But think about, what is going to be the difference between your core faculty, those faculty that are required to contribute the majority of their time to residency education versus your adjunct faculty, and how those roles may differ, so that you can be specific when you're recruiting. Also think about what roles are required by the ACGME. Do you need somebody who does inpatient pediatrics? Do you need somebody who does OB? Ideally, you could get that all in one person, but as we tend to sort our skill sets as we move on in our careers, it's not always possible. So really think about what are your needs. And then what competencies do you want in people? So what are their desired clinical skills? For example, for us, the increased attention on POCUS, most of my faculty don't know how to do POCUS. They were not trained. And so, getting those ultrasound skills are going to be key. If you can bring in a new grad who brings that skill set with them, so much so the better. So think about, are there clinical skills that are missing in your stable of faculty? Their commitment to your mission and values. Hiring, it's all about hiring. And while it's tough to get people in, please don't settle for somebody who is not aligned with your mission and values, because you'll regret it forever. Once they're in the door, it is really hard to invite them and make them available to industry, right? So you want to make sure that there's alignment there. And then what experience do they have around teaching, mentoring, and scholarship? I put that last because while that's important, those skills are certainly teachable. And we can do that in a relatively short period of time. Those other skills take a little bit longer to develop. Next slide, please. And then, as we heard earlier from Marla, build a value proposition. What are the strengths of your program? Do you have curricula that's particularly innovative? Talk about that. Know what those things are. Get your group together and decide what is it that sets our program apart from others. Showcase your community, any clinical or practice opportunities that you may have. And it's useful to really do a thoughtful analysis of where you are. Oftentimes we work in a place for a long time and we forget about what some of those attributes are. And Marla said earlier in our introductory comments about how their recruiting person really is able to showcase the community and the beauty of the mountains and where you are. So give that some thought, and make sure you build that into everything you do. We joke about the ads that come out with great hunting and fishing, right? No matter where you go, you hear great hunting and fishing. So try to be a little more innovative than that. Opportunities for professional growth. We all want to grow as physicians. And so where can you meet some of those gaps? Do you provide opportunity for maintenance of certification? Is there a way that you make that process for me easier as I move through my professional career? Will you help me grow as a faculty member? Maybe I'd love to work with residents, but I'm not entirely comfortable that I have the skills that I need. And none of us want to be in a position where we don't feel prepared to take on a role. So anything that you can do to promote that kind of professional growth and pay attention to the individual in their career trajectory, I think is absolutely critical. And then finally, I would say work-life balance is becoming increasingly more of a focus for our younger physicians. And Yeah, good for them. Good for them, right? Because we did not have this earlier in our careers, and I think they've actually got the right idea. And so, can you talk about the protected time that they have for teaching, that they're going to be able to find that joy in practice through that piece that they really enjoy in teaching? How flexible can you be with their schedules or with what locations they work at? If I have to drop my kids off at school in the morning, can I start my day at 9? Is there a way that I can, maybe work evenings instead of early in the morning? And any flexibility that you can offer. It requires thinking about our practices in a different way. But we're a 24/7 business, and we don't always think about ourselves as a 24/7 business. So there may be hidden opportunity that you can build being flexible about where you place people. Thinking about, are we going to be able to do telehealth in the future? And is there a way to protect some time where they don't have to be on site, but can do telehealth from another location? And then family-friendly institutional policies. Really take a good look at what your institutional policies are. We recently in our organization had some feedback from our younger faculty members that we really weren't paying attention to their maternity leave. Yes, we gave maternity leave, but when they came back, they were immediately expected to ramp up in terms of their RVUs. And what we ended up coming up with was a 2-year protected period of time where their RVUs were held stable regardless of what their productivity was, because we recognized while they were lactating, nursing babies, they did take some time away. It did impact their RVUs negatively. Early viral illnesses, they were out of clinic more. And so protecting their time was really essential for that first 2 years of that experience. And it's been a huge hit, absolutely huge hit, and frankly, didn't cost us much at all. Next slide. All right, so then you've got a recruitment timeline, and I would note that this is impacted based on the time of year. So we are a seasonal business, right? Residents finish in July, and I'm July 1, right? And they want to start a job usually August or September. And so when you're thinking about your timeline, keep that in mind that there's a whole bolus of people who will become available in that late summer or early fall time period. There's not as much movement later on in the year. And so that's the window that you're looking at. Think about your workforce really as much as 2 years out. Who's retiring? Are you expanding? What are you going to need as your classes grow? If you've got 3 residents now, but you're going to have 9 in 2 more years, what are your faculty needs going to be? 12 to 18 months before that need, get your job descriptions done, decide who's going to be on your hiring committee, and really begin reaching out to candidates. You all know this takes much, much longer than anybody ever expects. 9 to 12 months before you have that opening, get your positions posted, start reviewing candidates, conduct interviews. That really is not too early to start. And so if you're thinking about recruiting a graduating resident, you're reaching back into their early second year of training when you're thinking about onboarding them. And so truthfully, if you've identified a resident that looks like they're going to be a good faculty candidate, I would early on start wooing that person and making sure that they know that they are interested, where you're interested in having them be part of your team. It's a buyer's market, right? And so they can go anywhere they want. It's great if they could stay with you. Then 6 to 9 months before they start. And even this might be a little bit short, depending on the state process. Credentialing and onboarding can take a long, long time. And so we all depend on our medical license and our credentialing to pay our mortgages. And so make sure that you have enough time that they get in for those committee cycles. All right, next slide, please. So strategically, historically, we look at national and regional advertising, and I think that works sometimes. In family medicine, the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine puts out a biannual opportunities book, and that can be helpful sometimes to let people know that you're out there. What I find is far more effective. We're still a cottage industry, and networking is everything. Knowing what opportunities are available, using your state society chapters to be aware that you have positions available, word of mouth, former graduates, people who are in your community that can talk about the benefits of the community. That networking piece is absolutely critical. Obviously, our academic partners, and so even as far back as recruiting residents, if the residents know that there are job opportunities that are going to be available, that makes your program more attractive to them to think about that career trajectory. For some of them can't think beyond next month, right? But for some of them that does help. And so think about who your academic partners are and how you might engage in the medical school to at least make people aware of your existence. But we're not always thinking about a new job opportunity. And sometimes the best candidates are those that aren't even looking for a job, right? Not even in the market for a job. And then I met Dr. Hill and he was talking about their program. And the more I think about that, maybe I would like to work in that community. That might be something that I could explore. So people who aren't searching sometimes are the best folks to, not that we would ever poach. We don't poach from other programs, but giving people at least knowledge of opportunity. And then digital presence is huge. So a day in the life. Keep your visibility out on social media. Assign somebody the task of making sure folks know that you're out there and you're looking. Okay, next slide. Once you've selected some candidates, are evaluating, look at them much as you would residents, expertise, aptitude, scholarship potential. We know that scholarly activity is one of the most common citations. And so think about, even if they don't have a robust CV in that regard now, is that something we can develop in this person? Is there interest in that? And above all, their commitment to your mission and your community, because that's where the buck stops. During your interview, and I think you all know these things, structured interviews with faculty, residents, and staff. The more that prospective faculty members feel aligned with the residents and staff and the other faculty, the more likely they are to see themselves as part of your team. People don't come to you because of what you do. They come to you because of why you do it. And if they can see themselves as part of your story and that story that you tell, you're more likely to attract them to your program. And you may want to have a case-based discussion with your candidates, so you can get a sense of what their practice style is like, and they can get a sense of what your style is like. And then certainly you're going to tour your facilities. When you assess, again, that alignment is absolutely critical, as well as their potential for leadership. We know that in many rural programs, not being able to recruit a program director is a huge issue. You should always have a succession plan. So those of you who are PDs on the call, who in 3, 5, 10 years is going to replace you? Do you have somebody in the wings? And when you recruit, do you talk about that? Do you talk about, I'm not going to do this job forever. This may be something that you're interested in the future. That can be the thing that tips the balance in terms of somebody joining your team. And again, scholarly contributions. Next slide. Back one. So competitive salaries, we don't do price fixing. We don't talk about actual salaries, but benchmark with MGMA, WMC. Think about other ways that are non-monetary comp things. You can do incentives for leadership and scholarship, any loan repayment options. We know that there is some instability in the loan repayment market. So is there something you can do there? Are there competitive mortgage rates that you can manage for folks? Are there other kinds of opportunities to sweeten the deal? It doesn't always have to be in the salary. There can be other ways to do that. And then retention. Once we've got them, boy, we got to keep them. And so it's not enough to just welcome them and then let the chips fall where they may, right? We have to be really intentional about our mentorship and coaching of new faculty. How do you get ahead, right? What are the promotion pathways? What are the opportunities we see for you in the future? How do we care about you as a member of our team? And what are those opportunities? There's kind of a new concept that's floating around in HR literature called stay interviews as opposed to exit interviews. So in addition to like traditional performance evaluations, sitting down with people and talking with them about, so why do you stay? Why are you here? As opposed to going to any one of these other places that you could go, and what can we do to keep you here? And often that that leads into that conversation around again that joy in practice. And the theory is if you can do 20% of your time in things that bring you absolute joy, you're willing to do 80% of everything else, if you can get that 20%. And so identifying what that 20% is for somebody can be absolutely critical. And you can do that through these stay interviews. Okay, next slide. So onboarding, have a structured orientation. Again, it matters that once we've again been in a place for a while, we forget that there are so many unknowns about an organization, especially if you didn't train in that organization. So we make a lot of assumptions, and people are sometimes a little reluctant to ask. And so have a structured orientation. Again, especially important for people who didn't train with you. Engage early in teaching scholarship and committee work to again give them that piece of fulfillment in rounding out their whole career. Pair someone with another faculty member for mentorship. Just to, here's somebody that if you have a question, you can ask a question of this person. It can't always be the program director. You guys are super busy, and surprisingly, sometimes you're intimidating. And so it's often great to have another younger faculty member that they can just bounce questions off of, and not feel quite so fish out of water. And then I would do quarterly check-ins during the first year, so that they really do develop a trust, because a trust in your team is the thing that's going to lead you to success. All right, next slide. So pipeline. Once you have residents, and keep an eye out for who is going to be your future faculty. This is truly your best source going forward. You can think about, do you want to establish faculty development tracks? Maybe invite residents from other programs to come and participate in elective time in your faculty development track. Think about fellowships to meet those needs that you may not be meeting through your current faculty. Do you need to develop an OB fellowship, or can you send someone off to get additional OB training, faculty development training, and so on? And keep that going. I mean, the care and feeding of your pipeline strategy is really key. Again, thinking about very early, end of first year, beginning of second year, are these people that you want to lock down and sign up to join you before somebody else gets a hold of them. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Dan. Dan, it's all you.
Hey, do we have any burning questions or comments from Deb's presentation before we start the next little piece here? Or anything that anyone wants to comment on? So, okay. Well, further disclosure with myself, I am, there might be some other folks in the room. I am a recovering program director. I just stepped down after 13 years from the program director of our academic center, which also has a rural track too. And, we send a lot of folks from West Virginia to North Carolina. And one thing I've learned from that experience and also working with SHEPS and Wake Forest and MAHEC and a lot of organizations that I've gotten the privilege to work with is that there are about 8 North Carolinas, and that's really important. I do want to talk about psychiatry because it's one of the big areas where recruitment has been challenging, and it's really been an acceleration of some of that challenge. We could substitute things like OB and even primary care, which is a big recruitment challenge. Surgical subspecialties, obviously, how we find faculty in those regards. I think the most important things, it's sort of like, romance languages. There are differences between Spanish and Portuguese that you better know the differences because that, 30% difference is a huge difference. So recruiting OB to say rural Western North Carolina is there's some similarities with what we might have as psychiatry as our example today. But knowing some of those subtleties and how things work and how things work at the local level are very important. So with that, next slide. So this is data, very recent data from Shep Center, just came out in the last month or so. So this is North Carolina, and this is psychiatry, and how many psychiatrists are practicing. And outside of the Triangle, a little bit of Buncombe County, even Mecklenburg County and Charlotte Metro is the light green. So, there's an issue throughout the entire state. And is anyone here in one of the, is it 24 counties, 25 counties that don't have a psychiatrist? Anyone? Or at least pretty close. It sounds like we got a few people. So yeah, so that's what we're looking at, and that's again, this is not to be doom and gloom. The sky is not falling. I think there's a really good opportunity with a lot of the things that Deb discussed, and how can we really get granular and make this work. But there are 25 counties. Let's go to the next slide. In contrast, also some SHEPS data. Let's take a look at Western North Carolina, which is basically the state of West Virginia, about 1.8 million people in those western counties. You see a lot more of the darker green, not just the Asheville area, but around. What do you guys think might be some of the phenomenology with that? Why is that not the total light green or the gray? Any thoughts? Well, I think a big part of it is that at the end of the day, Mayhack has been training family doctors since 1974. And that's the difference. They've been training psychiatrists since the last 5 or 6 years. And so there's a real important emphasis that you've got to take a look at. Those mountain counties are less underserved. They're still very underserved, but they're less underserved because there have been trainees there for a long time and those relationships that have been built. And that's the theme of today. It's all about building relationships. And again, there's been a good, if there has been an increase of almost 70% of the total number of family docs in the state of North Carolina. It's still not enough. But I think that's a pretty remarkable piece where you have the trainees kind of being able to go from that pipeline from student to resident, and then they're going to stay in those local communities. Our hope, and what we really, I think, a big theme of what we do for NCGME and some other areas, it's like, how do we build that stuff up to see those other effects happen with some of the other specialties? So next slide. So let's talk about some of the specific things that are challenging for psychiatry. And again, this is pretty universal for a lot of other specialties. There is a multifactorial workforce shortage. We do have data that we've worked on with the TAC through SHEP Center that shows that if we can improve, say, rural training, that does have a direct impact on workforce. Again, it's a long time, and it doesn't fix all the problems that we have in our rural communities. But as Deb indicated, that pipeline really even pre-medical school. It's really even before medical school. Sometimes we have to be starting to look at this stuff, but we have those kind of issues from a program director standpoint. I have to have a conversation all the time with my trainees that are leaving their residency with, 200, 300, $400,000 sometimes worth of medical debt. I'd love to do a CAP fellowship or an addiction fellowship, but I've got to get into the workforce. And so if psychiatry has a shortage, then CAP is even worse. I think one stat that I kind of cite, I don't have the exact number on it, but Metro Boston has more child psychiatrists than I think 10 or 12 states put together. So, but that's what we're looking at. We also have an aging and retiring workforce. And so a big chunk of practicing psychiatrists are older. It's because, we can work in psychiatry a bit longer than, say, orthopedics or general surgery. And so there is sort of a bimodal distribution of that. But a lot of folks did retire. You may have been in a county that had that one psychiatrist, or someone that worked with the family medicine office for a long time, or someone like myself that's a dual trained person that does a little bit of both. And then they finally, after COVID, said, "That's it, I'm hanging this up." And it's a big, anyone that works in recruiting, I know we have some folks in recruiting offices, that is a hard replacement if you lose any of your docs, but especially folks that are unique like psychiatry. And then you have a geographic maldistribution. Like I said, there's a big difference between the Piedmont and the coastal plain and the metro areas and the triangle. What you have, but there's a lot of a different situation. And if we have a challenging climate with psychiatry nationally, and then we have some difficult weather in the state of North Carolina. We have some really perfect storms that are happening in certain parts of rural North Carolina where even though it's a state that's added population over the last couple of years, it is still a difficult thing. This is something I've learned in my travels and journeys through working with folks in North Carolina. It is the second most rural state after Texas with the number of rural citizens. I would have never guessed that. I would have think it was a western state, but the absolute number of folks from rural areas, we're right behind Texas and NC. So just go forward there. So we think of bottlenecks, a lot of times residency has been the main bottleneck to how we get new doctors. And we've had a lot of new med schools. And so those are some things we've really been actively working on to try to address some of these specific issues. Next slide, please. So this is just showing some AAMC data. This is a pretty good survey that just looked at different academic centers. And primary care is still the hardest thing to recruit. This is a survey of a bunch of med schools. And then number two is psychiatry. and then going down the list. So it's not just rural and underserved locations. I think we have a lot of challenges. Everyone thinks, oh, it's hard to find these surgical subspecialties, but really psychiatry and primary care are at the top of the heap as to what we're trying to recruit. Part of that is we have a big addiction problem. We have a big loneliness problem. Really, primary care and psychiatry are the folks that really are the boots on the ground for that type of care. Next slide. So this is from the most recent Medscape survey, which is not the AAMC and not the MGMA. These are hard things because they don't always quite line up and there's a lag. But psychiatry remuneration is something you got to be aware of. The compensation has gotten better. When I finished training, 20 some years ago, internal medicine and psychiatry, which I'm certified in both, were about the same, and it's been leaps and bounds. I think because it's a supply and demand situation. But if you look, really since 2022 to 2024, there's been a significant increase, and I think the demand has gotten so much higher. Things like parity, things like more focus on addiction work, things on virtual work. I think those are big kind of pieces. But being aware of this it's pretty critical as you're starting to look at how you're finding your faculty because they know what these things look like. Now, my residents show me stuff all the time that's like, I can make $500,000 right out of training, yada yada yada. But once you get granular with it, you realize it's not a real thing, and you have to have them understand some of those subtleties. But this is really important stuff to be aware of. So what compensation is, and what people perceive as compensation. Next slide. So I do want to mention, a lot of this is about new trainees and what we do. And again, I'll share some inside baseball for what I've told my residents. And I've had a lot of folks go to North Carolina over the years that I'd love to have kept in West Virginia, and that's okay. But don't sleep on your mid and late career faculty. It's just, how do you find them? Why are they wanting to change? What's the relationship to the area? Were they a UNC grad from the area and they want to come back and be fairly close to Chapel Hill, but they want an affordable place to live kind of thing? How do you find them? There's 3RNet, which I think is, a way that people can either post their interests, but it's really much more of a one-way street where folks that are looking for folks that are interested in rural medicine can find individuals. Last time I checked, there wasn't a lot of work in psychiatry on there. There may be 4 or 5 jobs in North Carolina that were posted on 3RNet. The other thing too, it's like with a later stage sort of clinician, avoiding sort of ageism and those sort of things, psychiatrists can work a lot longer. I think that's an important piece. And we've had some of our best psychiatrists that have come back from community care and then they come back to an academic center, for example, and they're outstanding because they've done that real work. And it's such a value added piece. So as you're looking for faculty, again, I think you have to really see what makes sense. And if someone's maybe would be at retirement age for a surgical specialty, you may have quite a bit more work that you're looking at because being non-procedural, it can really go a long way. Next slide, please. So here's some good news. And so if we look at pipeline from starting with med school, even over the last almost decade, we've seen this huge increase in interest in psychiatry. I think, as someone that's practiced for almost 25 years in psychiatry, I no longer have to explain to my parents why I chose psychiatry because they're seeing such a big issue with overdose and depression and suicide. Just go ahead and forward to there a little bit. I got some more information. So, but again, it's a good opportunity, and it's a really good opportunity for underserved programs. Next little bullet there. I think what's important is, North Carolina does not have a static profile with their medical students. There's the new partnership with Wake and Atrium and the Charlotte campus. There's the Cape Fear stuff that's happening. Campbell's expanded. A lot of the LCME schools have expanded. What's your relationship? Can you get, if you're in a less resourced area, can you have a rural rotation or a relationship? If you have a Campbell grad, can they start taking students just for third and fourth year rotations? Those are things that you need to make sure that you're really leaving no stone unturned to build some of those relationships. All right, next slide. So this is really important information to know, and this will be on the slide as to have, is just, this is the number of folks that are going for positions each year in North Carolina. So there's 81 folks going into psychiatry across the programs, pretty close to pediatrics, which is 83, and close to emergency medicine. So knowing sort of what you have as an opportunity, not only for the student kind of piece, but also for resident pipeline. There's the established programs and there's some newer programs as well, but can you build a relationship? Are you going to those programs in some capacity? Those are things that, obviously as a program director, I can be very protectionist about who I let in and out of my resident area and those sort of things. But usually for a valid in-state recruiting process and something that say that NCGME can help with, there's ways to reach out to family medicine programs, OB programs to try to build those relationships. One of the best things you can do if you're in a hospital system or in a clinic where you have a former grad of that program, find a way to get them back. If they're an ECU grad, have them see if they can go give just a. We actually do that here. We call it transition to practice. I just had someone from Atrium that's now in the Charlotte program, which is now obviously partnered with Wake. He came back and talked about his job, what he liked about it, what was challenging. So those are ways you can really look at that. If you have someone that's already sort of affiliated with your system that can go back and talk to those programs, that's worth its weight in gold. These data are available every spring. Deb's team works really hard to make them available. They are amazing so you can see where you're at. Next slide. So other psych-specific things, again, I think one of the biggest pieces is that we've had the biggest impact from telemedicine versus any other specialty. For sure, most psychiatrists are now using some sort of hybrid sort of system. Like I saw patients yesterday virtual, and then I saw them in person, and we're if not fully virtual, we're seeing a lot of that. There are a lot of folks, and frankly, a lot of my residents are taking 100% virtual jobs when they leave, and so trying to figure out ways to either balance that or if there's things that you can do at the system level to help with that. But there's a lot of things you got to be able to wrangle with policies, regulations, parity. Just for next advance there. So, you do have a good resource with East Carolina, with Dr. Syed and their team that does a lot of work with really being on top of things with how North Carolina integrates telehealth. They're leading the nation in a lot of that work. I do want to talk for a minute about millennials and Gen Zs. My new residents are, in fact, the ones that are graduating are millennials and Gen Zs. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them. It just means that they're a little bit different. Can you afford, Mary Alice? That population. So I'm a Gen Xer, and I was trained by mostly baby boomers and other Gen Xers and some silent generation folks. It's a difference, and we're seeing folks that are entering the workforce that have a very different perspective on what their priorities are. Doesn't make it negative. It's just a way you have to look at things different. They do value autonomy more. They value a lot of flexibility in their work. They've grown up with technology. Most of us on this call looks like we weren't grown up. We didn't grow up with a cell phone from day one. Our current generation has done that. So tech is a big part of what they're doing, and I think that's a big part of the attraction to telehealth careers. They've lived that. Most of my medical students and residents that I've trained, they barely went to medical school. They hung out in their living room and watched their course, and then they went in for their tests. It's a different world. If I missed 3 days, I think they would have like dismissed me. But it's a different world where what'd you say, Deb? The other day they watched it at 1.5x speed on the treadmill. So that's what we're dealing with. And so, but they also value things like psychological safety and justice and beneficence and things that we sometimes forget about in medicine. So they can be so value added. There's I have a colleague at Wake Forest that they've done some studies with how students learn and how it's different. If you want to send me an email after the talk, I'm happy to get you in contact with those folks. And again, integrative services are great on paper, but they're not happening as much as we'd like them to. I'm an internist and a psychiatrist, and I struggle with even having people understand what having co-located services can look like. But those are things we have to keep looking for financial models at the state because the federal level is still pretty challenging with that. But there are ways that we can. It just makes so much more sense to have a psychiatrist and a case manager looking at 40 charts than seeing 12 patients a day as much as you can. When you can do integrative models. Next slide. So I did use some privilege with my residents, and I asked some of my folks that are getting ready to graduate, what are you looking for when you're starting? Because they're starting to interview, they're starting to look at jobs. And some of these things you would kind of guess, you want to be close to your family, you want that work-life balance, which is again, it's not just a millennial and Gen Z thing, that's a Gen X and a boomer thing too. Positive work culture. One thing that surprised me was EMR, and one of my residents even said specifically they've really gotten comfortable with Epic, and they're not going to work anywhere that doesn't have Epic. Now, don't change your EMR just to accommodate a recruit for sure. But one thing that was very surprising to me was fair compensation, not exorbitant compensation. So, but again, having an understanding what they perceive as fair is very critical. So, any questions about any of those sort of? And again, they were very gracious to just give me a couple quotes as to what they're looking for as they're starting to think about this stuff. So, okay, next slide. So this is something Deb talked about. I do worry a little bit. This is again trying not to be Mr. Sky is falling, but if we do now have a cap on the amount of federal loans you can get for graduating medical students, and it's 200K, that doesn't cost some of the most affordable medical schools, and so we're going to have to look what that looks like. The thing that I worry about as a psychiatrist slash internist, I'm sure primary care does. I know our med school is very worried that that will drive more and more people to non-primary specialties. It's like all of a sudden I've got these private loans, but the good news is North Carolina does have a very progressive North Carolina Office of Rural Health with some placements. So go forward. And for primary care and for psychiatry, there's incentive bonuses that you can look at. So the website to that's on the previous page. If you're not familiar with those, and I'm sure some folks on the call have utilized some of those resources, making sure that you're aware of them, that in addition to whatever incentives you're looking at, that they could also, depending on your zip code and what type of patients you serve, they may be able to qualify for a lot of loan repayment. I know it's very challenging sometimes, like in the state of West Virginia, which is, the only state in Appalachia. Sometimes I scratch my head as to what they classify as rural and what they classify as urban. But just having a Starbucks and a Target doesn't count anymore, I guess. But that there's a lot of things that are kind of interesting. But take a look at some of those kind of state-based incentives. That if it's something that you have a new grad, that in addition to whatever sign-on bonus or relocation stuff that you have, that might be a really good way to help work with the state to say how can we kind of not just recruit people but keep them. So next slide, please. I think these next two slides are my favorite. So this is which states are net importers and net exporters of physicians. This is also data from Shep Center, and it's current data. Just a wonderful resource. It's kind of hovering over Oklahoma there, but if you look at North Carolina, it is a net importer of physicians. So that is also on the bright side. It's not the total sky is falling. It's again, where are they going? Are they going to Metro Charlotte? Are they going to the Research Triangle? Are they going to basically, some of the places that have more established care environments? So it's really trying to figure out how you can harness some of that transition. Deb and I are both. Deb's in the darker orange net exporter. I'm in the yellow, but I can tell you this: a lot of folks go to the Carolinas from West Virginia from our training programs. And then next slide. So that's physicians in general. Very similar for residents. So I like I said, I think I've got just at Atrium, I've got 7 or 8 former residents and students that work in the Atrium system in Metro Charlotte. I've got former residents at Mayheck, at East Carolina, in rural North Carolina, at UNC, at Duke. But I think what happens sometimes, people end up at one spot and then people follow. That does happen quite a bit. But this is still good news. Now, North Carolina is not importing as many residents as they are physicians in general, but you can see Texas and California, Florida, and Georgia, and then kind of Seattle, Washington, and Oregon. Those are the really popular places. Not surprised by Colorado and Arizona either. So, but I think one big goal is to try to continue to get North Carolina for residents to be that darker purple, or to at least retain the folks that are finishing those programs I mentioned. So, with that, I think that's my slides, and I think we're ready to transition into questions. Okay.